So I muted myself, classic. I unmuted myself and then I pushed the button by accident and muted myself. So let's just start over and pretend like I didn't just talk for 40 seconds by myself like a dum-dum. Hey, Vesna, welcome in. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Feel free to, I already fixed it. Yes, I muted myself. I fixed it. Yeah. So, yeah. So here's the deal. We are going to talk about the revenue ranges we need to know about as writers, right? But before we get to that, we need to talk about profit, revenue, and we need to talk about funding. So in order, yeah, I fixed it. I know it should pop back in. Yeah, I know, because I pushed. So just as like a side note, I did unmute myself, but then I accidentally pushed the button twice. So I always mute it just because I don't want there to be like a ton of sound before I go live. Then I unmute it, and then I talk, but sometimes I press the button twice, so I unmute myself and mute myself, and then I start talking, and it's a whole thing. So Vesna and Shara, like, we should be all good now. So we're going to talk about profit, revenue, and funding before we get to anything. And in order to be smart cookie writers, we need to know about how these businesses run in terms of their content and their marketing. Yes, sometimes I am a goober. This is just how it is. I don't know what to tell you. Like, sometimes I just make mistakes like this, and it's part of going live, and it's just like, whatever. Hey, Vicky, I like your wave. Hi, Vicky. Let's do a pup date just to, like, ease the tension of me muting myself like a dum-dum. Hey, Barry, ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Good job. You're on fire today. All right, there you go, Minnie. Good girl. Everybody's bundled up. It's a little chilly. It's rainy and cold here, kind of in Austin. And by cold, I mean it's like 40, so it's not that cold. Ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Oh, buddy, you're so close. Minnie, you ready? High five. High five. Come on. Good girl. Other one. Good job. They're kind of soft and fuzzy today because they're a little slow because they're all wrapped up being warm. Let's see if I can get Barry. All right, Barry, can you catch this last one? Ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Oh, buddy. Let's try one more time. 1, 2, 3, dog. Yes! Good job, buddy. All right, Minnie. Ready? High five. High five. Good job. All right. So let's talk about some things. Now that I'm unmuted and we can actually talk. So let's talk about revenue, profit, and funding. So the first thing we need to understand before we actually get into the revenue ranges is that companies, when we go look at their revenue, right? So what we're looking at when we go look at our companies is their revenue. That means how much money they're coming in, or like how much money is coming into their business, right? How many sales they're making, whatever, all the money that's coming in. Profit is what's left over. So I know this sounds silly and very basic, but for me, it took me a long time to understand it. I didn't get it. And I didn't understand how to apply to my business and like getting clients. So profit is what's left over after we take out all the expenses, the salaries, whatever types of stuff that are costs, fees, expenses of the business. So revenue, when we go look at revenue, even if they say 100 million, let's say that the revenue of the company is $100 million, but their profit only ends up being 10 million. Let's say they end up spending 90 million. They're not running their business very well, and they spend 90 million on salaries and fees and expenses and programs and whatever it is, and they only have 10 million. So that 10 million in profit is now going to go out to budget everybody else. So that 10 million in profit is going to end up being like however much the marketing and content people get, right? They don't get 10 million. They only get a slice of that money because that 10 million funds all the internal projects. So, hey, Marie, welcome in. Marie, I've unmuted myself, so now we're on the right track. So the deal is that when you see 100 million in revenue, that doesn't mean they have a ton of profit. That's why understanding revenue and profit is really important, because sometimes I talk to writers and they're like, but they had all this money, they had this big revenue. And I'm like, but they didn't have the profit. Their budget is really small, right? So I always kind of tell this story too that I think really illustrates this point. A long time ago, years ago, like it must be like 5 or 6 years ago now, I was approached by $1 billion company. They had more than $1 billion in revenue. I think it was like 1.6 or 1.7. They had billions of dollars in revenue. and they came and asked if I would write for free for exposure. Okay. So billions of dollars, not even just millions. They had billions of dollars in revenue. It was this big company. And they were like, hey, do you want to come write for our blog? And, you know, you'll get exposure. We can't pay you right now. I'm like, you have billions of dollars. That's the big difference. That means that their marketing department, they're not getting a very big slice of that profit, right? And they said they weren't paying anyone. It wasn't just approaching me. And I was like, are you paying for any content? Like, they weren't paying for anything. So at that time, that's a big lesson. That was a big lesson for me in like, oh, the fact that they have all this money doesn't mean that department, the marketing / content / the people we normally work with, has money. So that's a really big differentiator between revenue and profit. That's something that we need to understand. So we are approaching these companies based on revenue, but we don't know until we talk to them what their budget is, what their, like, basically their budget is their slice of the profit. That's the slice that they get out of the base, essentially the company profits to move forward, grow the company, all that stuff. This is really important to understand. So that's why you get billion-dollar companies coming to you asking you to work for free because their budget is super small because they're spending money elsewhere. And this applies to all different types of niches, and we'll go over that in a second. Let's talk about funding. Funding is a similar beast. So before we actually get to numbers, funding is always good, but there's different types of funding. There's seed funding, there's Series A through like whatever, A, B, C, D, E. Like, so I often work with Series B companies. I think we've talked about this before, but I often work with Series B or Series C startups. Every once in a while, I work with people with seed money or Series A, and this is when I work with startups, which is pretty often. And that's because when they get funding, it matters which round it's in. So sometimes when they get seed funding, that means they haven't done anything. They have a concept or they are trialing things, and then they get seed money to actually build that out, right? So that doesn't mean they're doing marketing and content. That means they're actually building out the physical product, whatever it is, like software, or they're building out, I don't know, like a community. Let's say it's a really unique type of home builder and they're building out a community, or a lot of times that seed money or that Series A money is going towards building the thing out. So it also depends on what slice you're getting, right? So the slice is what the marketing department or what the content department is getting. And a lot of times startups don't have anybody in marketing to talk to until like Series B. Sometimes they have it with Series A, but usually Series B is when the marketing people get hired. And like I said, this is what I've noticed in my own business after 10 years. Most of the time, if you're a Series B or below, or like somewhere in there, you're usually talking to the founder and like one marketing person. And it depends on how much of that funding they get towards marketing. So seed round and Series A, they're usually building the product out, especially with tech and software products. And then the same thing with Series B. So like they're still building the product out, but Series B is like, okay, cool. We've actually built it out. We've tested it. And now we need to market. We need to like let more people know so we can build our revenue, all that good stuff. So the slice of the pie, the slice of the funding you get at Series B is much larger. That's when they're actually kind of building efforts out. So when we go over revenue ranges, that's why this matters, is every single point of this phase that a startup goes through, the slice really changes a lot more so than a regular company. Like a startup has to get through a lot of trials before they actually start selling and marketing the product. They have to build it out. There's a lot of different hoops that they have to jump through in order just to like reach a larger audience or to start their marketing efforts. And that's really important to know, because we don't want to just reach out to people, just be like, I'm reaching out. Why am I not getting a response? We want to be really smart about who we're reaching out to, right? Not only that they have the right revenue amount, but they are in the right phase of their business to actually hire someone like us. This is the problem that I see with writers, is they're like, I'm sending all these LOIs, but they're not actually qualifying who that is and what phase they're in and what's kind of going on. They're just like sending them out to whoever. They don't check revenue. They don't check the business. They don't see like how things are going. They don't check Crunchbase. They just kind of like send it out. They like do that thing that real estate agents talk about. They spray and pray. So they like spray everybody and hope that somebody hires them. We don't want to do that. We want to be really smart about who we reach out to and that they actually are have a much higher likelihood of needing our help. So let's kind of move to our next phase. Our next phase is like, what are those revenue ranges? So I should have put my numbers up, but I already muted myself today, so we're doing great. So 2, we're actually going to talk about the revenue ranges. So let me go back. So number 1 is the difference between revenue, profit, and funding, right? Why those things matter. And then funding means seed money, Series A, Series B, all the way up for startups, and the difference between revenue and profit for most other types of businesses. Most of the time when you're working with startups, they're using their funding money, right? Because they're not marketing, which means they're not getting sales, or the sales are really low. And every once in a while you get a unicorn. But so number 1 is we have to know those differences in order to narrow in on the right types of potential clients. And one last thing I'll say here is that we want to align with the people who are going in the right direction. This is another thing, is like, we need people who are growing. We saw that they made it through seed, through Series A and B, or we saw that their revenue is growing over time, which you can see in the LinkedIn stats. If you have LinkedIn Premium, you can go to the company page, and on there, it'll say their revenue has been growing, their staff has been growing. It'll show you like percentages of year-over-year growth. That's the kind of stuff we want to align with, because we're growing. As freelance writers, we're growing a business. We're growing a small business where we need to align ourselves with clients who have similar goals for their content. They're looking for growth. Like, they're not in a fixed mindset, right? Where they're just like, okay, we're going to do 4 blog posts forever and just hope it works out. No. So we want to align ourselves with clients who have similar mindsets and similar goals. And that is really important with this revenue, profit, and our funding pieces. Okay, let's talk about number 2. If you have questions, you can always pop them in the chat. Happy to answer anything you have. We can talk about anything freelance writing wise. And if you're watching this on the replay, hold on a second. If you're watching this as a replay, you can always go to mandyellis.com/question and pop your question or topic in there. So we have a question that popped in that we're going to talk about from Hal later on. But if you have a question that's popped up and you're watching this and you're like, oh, I need to know what's going on, you can always pop it into mandyellis.com/question. And you can even include topics. You're like, hey, can you talk more about this? You can always pop it in there. So let's talk about 2. And we'll get to questions at the end. So we'll get to Hal's question at the end. So 2 is our revenue ranges. So let's talk about this. I've talked about this before. I'm sure you've heard it. But the deal is, we are looking for companies that make 5 to 50 million, at least, like regular companies. Startups are a different beast. So we'll talk about them after. So 5 to 50 million. Why is that range so big? Well, exactly the principle I just talked about is revenue versus profit. I could go to a business that has 5 million in revenue and they spend 50% of that on marketing. Great, now I have $2.5 million of marketing budget to work with. How do I know that? I don't until I talk to them. That's why this range is so big. This is kind of what I figured out. I used to think it was much lower, but the deal is, with all the changes from the pandemic and how marketing and content marketing is growing and changing, I think 5 million, a business needs to make at least 5 million, not a startup, a regular ass business. They need to make at least 5 million to have a healthy marketing budget where we can actually get bigger projects, not just like really small one-off gigs that are a pain in the butt to do. These are actually projects that get them results. That's the really important part. It's not that they're small projects that are frustrating for us. It's that we have a harder time getting results for people on like one-offs. We have a harder time showing people the value of content marketing, or we have a harder time getting results or helping them reach their goals when they want to do baby projects. Bigger projects really get them a lot more momentum and they live a lot longer. So they need at least 5 million. Now, in some niches, they need more than that. So in some niches, like, that's why I say 5 to 50 million at least, because some niches, they need 50 million because they've spent all this money on other stuff. Like, they built out a sales team. They built out a huge, really expensive tech department to build their software product or to build their hardware product. They've spent money on all these other different pieces of their business. So their marketing piece is smaller, but they make 50 million, right? So this is why it matters to know that range. And of course, if they make more than 50 million, go hog wild. That's totally fine. I just feel like 5 to 50 million is where we start from, and it matters in different niches. For example, yes, hello. You look super cute today. You can get a Treato because you look super cute. All right, Treato for you because you look super cute. Can you give me a high five? Good job. All right, Bo, ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Oh, buddy, you're so close. Come on, buddy, you can find it. You just touched it 3 times. There we go. All right. So, for example, let me give you some good niche examples here. For example, when I don't reach out to like general food companies anymore. I do more hospitality tech and restaurant tech and different types of things that help restaurants, like softwares and POS systems and stuff. But when I reached out to food companies, they needed a fuck ton of money. They needed 50 million just to have enough to do a big like marketing project. When I reached out to like fintech companies or insurtech companies, they needed like 5 or 10 million. They didn't need as much money because they know they need to spend marketing money to get people on board with the tech. The food companies operate way differently than the tech companies, right? The same thing with like health brands. So if you're reaching out to a health brand and they make supplements or they make organic blah, 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 whatever it is, sometimes they need to build a factory. They need to build out all these things. They need to talk to farmers. Like there's so many other pieces of their business. Or ag tech. This is another one. Ag tech is kind of similar where they need more money because they have to build, like let's say it's one of those indoor farms. They have to build a giant indoor farm and they have to have money to do that and maintain it and pay people to make sure all the plants are growing and all the lights are on before they start giving a huge pile of money to marketing. And that's why that revenue range is so big. There's smaller tech companies or there's SaaS companies or hospitality tech companies. Like hospitality tech companies, that for me has oftentimes been like 10 to 50 or 10 to 30, somewhere in there, million. Some like different with startups. So the deal is that these companies are in different niches using money in a different way. That's why the range is so big. And you can't know until you talk to the company, right? So if I go to an ag tech company and say, send them an LOI and say like, what's up? I think, like it seems like you make 30 million in revenue. I wouldn't say that, but I'd say like, hey, I think we're a good fit to work together. I noticed that they're creating content, but it's not consistent. It looks like they have a bunch of great testimonials that they could have made into case studies, but they didn't. It looks like they have a bunch of video content that they could repurpose. They have a lot of potential for really good content projects that can get them results. So I reach out to them and I'm like, okay, I double checked. Your revenue is 30 million. And I reach out and they're like, oh yeah, our budget for marketing projects is only $2,000 a month. And, right now we're doing that internally because to save costs, whatever. That's the big difference is like, we don't know, but we don't know until we talk to them, but we at least need to fall in that 5 million to 50 million range because our chances are better that they come back to us and say, hey, yes, we have some marketing budget and yes, we'd like to create some content. We're thinking about these ideas. What we want to do here is up our potential of not only getting a response on our LOI, but getting a project, right? We want to each time we do something, we want to get better and better results, right? So we have to keep refining the process. So that means we start with the idea of 5 to 50 million on a regular business. We'll talk about startups in a second. 5 to 50 million on a regular business. And then as we have more conversations, as you talk to more people in your niches, right? You talk to more insurtech companies, you talk to more food companies, you talk to more ag tech companies, you talk to more biotech companies, you talk to more restaurant companies, or whatever your niches are. The more you talk to them, the more you realize, oh, I talked to these 5 restaurant companies that had 10 million and it didn't go anywhere. But I talked to these 5 restaurant companies who made 50 million and everybody was on board and they had at least goals and a project and an idea of what they wanted to do. That's when you start honing in on like, okay, this niche of mine needs about this much and this niche of mine needs about this much, right? And if it's over that amount, like let's say hospitality tech needs 10 million. If you find a hospitality tech company with 30 million, you're like, okay, pretty sure they have a marketing team, they have a marketing budget because I know the minimum for that is about 10 million. So we are in the process of figuring that out. But I know from my own experience and from bugging my friends all the time about what these companies do, is that 5 to 50 million for a regular company is where we want to be. Vicky has a question. So Vicky always comes in here with great questions too. So Vicky says, do companies selling cheaper products need to have higher revenue to afford to be good clients? This is a fantastic question. It really depends. So for me, let's think about this. Sometimes there are products that are one-time buys. So let's say someone's selling equipment. That's a one-time buy, but it's $10,000 or $20,000. Let's say there's another company that supplies the software for that equipment, and that fee is $10 a month forever to run the equipment. So the idea here is that you would have to know how much volume they're doing in selling the cheaper products. So like when we look at it, the equipment is a one-time fee of $20,000, and it would take a long time for a $10 a month software thing to like subscription fee to get up to $20,000, right? But we don't really know the volume. So the price, this is a tough question to answer. So the price of their product depends on the model of their business. So the deal is that if I had a cheaper product, but it's a monthly subscription that has to be done, that could be more value than a one-time $20,000 equipment fee, because not everybody has $20,000 to invest in that equipment, but people have $10 to run the software every single month. So I think if I was thinking about selling cheaper products, they need to have more volume of items sold. So if you were able to go figure out if they have a high volume of products being sold, that would probably tell you a little bit more than the revenue, the higher revenue part. So if I was in this situation and I saw someone with a cheaper product, but they had the right amount of revenue, they were between 5 and 50 million, I would look at who their clients are more so than how much of that product they're selling. So for example, if I go to a software company and their software is $10 a month, or if I go to a SaaS company or a fintech or whatever, and they have Microsoft as a client and Nike as a client, that probably says a lot more so to me than a bunch of places I've never heard of, or a bunch of places that are only local to their area. That tells me more about how they're doing their marketing, right? If their marketing if their marketing is capturing a Nike or a Whole Foods or a Microsoft, that tells me a lot more about their strategy and how they're executing and using their revenue and their dollars and like their product than something that might be smaller and local, and their testimonials are from like people I don't know about, or it's and it depends on the niche too. So for example, like for some of my clients, they're prop tech clients, they have a lot of local people, right? Because they're in certain markets, right? They're in Texas, or they're in California or New York or Illinois. Excuse me. And those things are important to have locally, but their product is something that is relatively cost effective. It's not cheap, right? But it's relatively cost effective, and people can keep referring that product. I know this is kind of like a weird tangent, but all the different products operate differently. So, okay, I think the answer to this is no, if I'm going to be short about it. I think the answer to this is no, because the revenue really tells you what direction they're going in. And if you can see who they've worked with, if you can see past clients, if you can see testimonials, if you can see bigger brands working with them, then they're doing something right. So I hope that answered your question, Vicky. But basically what we want to do is we wouldn't really know the volume, like how many of those cheaper products they're selling, right, to create that higher revenue, or we wouldn't really know the back end until we talk to someone. And most of the time, what we want to think about is the model of their business. It is a lot harder for someone to fork over $20,000 than it is $10 a month. This is why SaaS companies are growing really quickly, or fintech companies, or anything that is under a subscription type model. Those subscription type models are affordable, they're regular, they have an ongoing thing, it's easier to get referrals. And that product isn't cheaper so far to maintain or create. Like a software product isn't cheaper to maintain or cheaper to build than the equipment. It's just the model of the business. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful. I think for me, that's the most important part is like, what's the model of their business? Who have they worked with before? How does this actually, kind of, how is this run in the long term? Like, is it going to be really difficult to keep up the marketing of that $20,000 piece of equipment? Maybe not. Maybe maybe not, but it's a lot easier to get people to sign up for a $10 a month subscription fee. Okay. And then Shara has a question. She says, is there one best site or tool for finding revenue and profit? Yes, there is. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So, yes, Grumpy. Hello. Would you like to submit a complaint? I don't know if you guys can hear her, but she sits over here sometimes and makes like these sad, grumpy hippo noises. All right, buddy, ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Oh, buddy, we were so close. All right, ready? High five. Other one. Other one. Other one. Good job. Sometimes we got to add the extra high fives in there. All right, so yes. Now that we've kind of talked about the breakdown, so your different niches will have different revenue ranges once you learn more about that niche. Starter's pistol is $5 to $50 million. They need $5 million to $50 million in any niche to be viable, and how they spend that money, you won't know until you talk to them. Then once you talk to more companies, you realize, oh, my minimum for fintech isn't 5 million, it's actually 15 million, because I've talked to enough companies to learn that when they make under 15 million, they don't have enough marketing budget. That's something you learn over time, but 5 to 50 million is the buffer. And then you define by niche. Now let's talk about startups and finding revenue. So Shara's question is a great one. It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite questions. If I'm looking for a revenue for a regular business, I can just Google it. Like, this is the thing that I just didn't realize for a long time. If I need to Google a company's revenue, I can usually just Google like Zillow revenue, or I can Google, whatever the company's name is, revenue, and it'll pop up in Google. There will be a press release, a report, an article, like something that says what their revenue was. If that doesn't happen, right? If I'm going to go look up a startup, I love Crunchbase. I love it. I recommend it to everyone. When you go into Crunchbase, you just type in the company name. Don't press enter, okay? There's a search bar in Crunchbase. Just type in the name. When you press enter, it sends you to this other dumb screen. So type in the company name. Just type it in, and there will be a list of companies that pop up. Pick the one that it is, right? Pick the right logo, pick the right name. Sometimes there's companies with multiple different companies with the same name. I always kind of check LinkedIn. So go to Crunchbase, type the name in, don't press enter, pick the name up, and it'll tell you their funding round, how much money they have, if they've had any mergers. It will link to their LinkedIn page. It will link to their Twitter and Facebook oftentimes. And then, hold on. And then you can go straight from Crunchbase to LinkedIn to send an LOI. You can send it through InMail, or you can find out who the person is you need to talk to and go from there. Crunchbase is the best. The other thing about Crunchbase is sign up for Crunchbase Daily. Crunchbase Daily is the newsletter, is the newsletter that they send out every single day with funding announcements, with articles about what's trending in your niche, like in all of these things. It has helped me find so many clients, helped me understand trends in my niches, understand who's getting money and why, what types of things. Like, this is how I started figuring out that Series B was where I kind of wanted to work in more often. That Crunchbase Daily newsletter is the business. And then on the weekends, they send a newsletter that's like, here's a roundup of all of our articles we published this week. And sometimes they're in your niche, like they talk about ag tech or fintech, or they talk about women's companies that are getting more funding, or they talk about international funding. Like, there's all this gold in there that teaches you so many things and gives you potential clients. So definitely sign up for the Crunchbase Daily newsletter. Now, the other thing is you can use Owler, 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 and that will tell you, the revenue of different companies. I think it's not free anymore. Like, there's certain things that you can see for free, but a lot of it is paid. I always just Google the revenue. If I can't find it on there, I look on Crunchbase. Sometimes I'll use Owler. You can find revenue announcements or funding announcements on LinkedIn. Like, if you go to the company page, you can find it there. You can use something like Rocket Reach because that sometimes will tell you an email, but it might also tell you revenue information. There's lots of places, like you can always Google the company names and press release. So like if I was going to Google like whatever the, I don't know, like just company name press release, sometimes you'll end up reading a couple of press releases and realize that their revenue is growing, or they mention like, hey, this thing happened or we got funding, and then you can have more revenue information. Yeah, so the deal is that for me, Google, just Google like company name revenue, right? Like Zillow revenue, or whatever it is, like Monster Energy drink revenue. And then your second thing is Crunchbase for startups. But there are a lot of companies that are now like basic ass companies that started as startups, and their stuff still comes up on Crunchbase. That's the next one. Owler, Owler. That's another place to find revenue. There's a lot of collection sites. There's like G2 Crowd, which I think is now just called G2. That tells you all this information about different software companies. So one of my friends uses G2 all the time to find different competitors that she can reach out to say like, hey, I'd love to work with your company. And this is how she starts making her list of companies to reach out to. So if you can find a niche specific site, TechCrunch is a good one to look at. A niche specific site like G2 where it lists all of these different companies. There's lots of review sites too that list revenue information. So like there's like I'm blanking on the name, but there's this site that like collects a bunch of software products in all these different niches, and it tells you like contact information, it tells you revenue ranges, and you can just Google it. So if you can find a niche specific site like that, like someplace that talks about different types of companies and collects them in a database, right, basically, that's really helpful. So G2 is a good one. But honestly, like there's lots of different places that you can find revenue information, and you can Google around if you can't find it. So if you can't find any revenue, right, this is something we need to talk about. If you can't find revenue, you need to have at least somewhere around 50-ish to 100 employees for regular companies. Startups could be 10 to 25-ish, maybe 25 to 50, probably more like 10 to 25. Oh my gosh, you are grumbly today. Grumble muffin. You're a grumble muffin. So that's the deal. If you can't find revenue information, try to guess between 10 and 25 employees for startups, and probably like 50 to 100 minimum. These are all minimums for reaching out, because sometimes for some reason you can't find revenue. That's happened to me a bunch of times. If you can't find revenue, don't abort the mission. Just go figure out how many employees work there, right? Go look at LinkedIn, and if they have about the right number, send your LOI. They might have some marketing needs, like some content stuff that you need help on. Okay, hope that was helpful, Shara. Shara also says, FYI, my dog loves Vandy's live streams because he gets Treatos every time her puppers do. All right, so let's do that right now. Let's see if Shara's dog will get a Treato. All right, ready, buddy? 1, 2, 3, dog. Yes, good job. All right, ready? High five. Other one. Other one. Other one. Yes, good job, Charlie. Good job. I also work with cats. So if anybody has any cats, I know from experience that cats also enjoy the live stream because they get Treatos when I give out Treatos. Buddy. Barry. This is what happens when you have a senior dog. Bo is almost 15 and a half. So we just want to do a little shout out here. Bo's almost 15 and a half. He's like 60, 65 pounds. So every time we take him to the vet, they just tell us that he's like a freak of nature, which he basically is. Like, he still runs around our backyard. He runs up and down the stairs. I don't know how he's doing so well at his age. Ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Uh-oh. Ready? 1, 2, 3, dog. Oh, buddy, so close. He is getting cataracts, which is probably why he struggles with catching things, but he's always struggled with catching things. All right, Minnie, ready? High five. Other one. Other one. Oh, easy. Ouch. Easy. Nice. Good job. Other one. Good job. There we go. So, Bo is basically like super geriatric. Here you go, buddy. Good job. All right, Minnie, we're going to have you catch on camera because you're the more athletic one. Yeah, I know. You're like, I'll just give you a high five. Good job. All right. So I hope that Shara's dog got a treat out. All right, Vicky. Vicky says, what's the minimum employee number range? Yeah, I still think it's 10 for startups. It depends on how their money is going out. So the deal is that I think for me, what I've seen in the past year or so, even with all the pandemic, I think startups are 10. I think regular companies are like 50 to 100. Startups could be anywhere from 10 to 25, depending on how their money is coming in. But yeah, like they need at least startups need at least some kind of structure in there, like someone building the product, someone figuring out the roadmap of the product, someone driving the company, obviously, and then a bunch of ancillary people, HR and whatever. And then the same thing with regular companies. Like regular companies, they downsize, but at least 50 to 100, I think, is kind of the good range. Yes, you can reach out to companies with less employees or less revenue, but the likelihood that you will get a ton of high paid work is much lower. What we're trying to do here is align as many different hoops that we can get through to connect with the right companies. So not only is the company growing, or not only do they have the right revenue, but they have about the right number of employees, they have a content or a marketing person, or they are creating content, they are moving forward, they are doing all these things. We want to align with as many things as we can before we get on a call, because then the likelihood of us connecting with the right people is much higher. And we've also had so many hoops that they've jumped through before we reached out that the likelihood of us getting a well-paid project is higher. And this is what I've done in my business is like, I have all these things before I ever reach out and send an LOI, because then not only is my response rate for my LOIs higher, but the likelihood I get a project is higher, and that it's a well-paid project, right? Like my rates work within their budget, or their budget is, they're like, hey, we want to do this stuff. Here's our budget. And I'm like, that sounds good. Okay. Hope that was helpful. Benjamin the Hound. That's so cute. One of my favorite things, we're going to take a little sidetrack here real quick. One of my favorite things about this live stream, and one of my favorite things about being able to connect with other writers, is that people send me pictures of their dogs all the time. I had someone reach out to me from my newsletter and send me a picture of his dog. Like, I just love that. It is my favorite thing. They're like, hey, I know you have dogs. Like, here's a picture of my dog. And it makes my day every time. They're like, my dog's name is this. This is the kind of dog they are. These are their favorite treats, da-da-da-da-da. That is like one of my all-time favorite things. And one of my favorite things about having these guys on the live stream is that I feel like, then I get to up my chances of getting cute pictures of dogs. You have to go to your hobbit hole. Good job. Sit. High five. Good job. All right. So that's one of my favorite things. So if you ever come on this live stream or you ever read my newsletter, my weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for by getting my pricing guide. So if you go and get my pricing guide, you get my weekly newsletter where I give tips and tricks, which is like usually fast action stuff. Like it's quicker because I only have the newsletter space. On the live stream, we can chit chat. But if you go here and get my free pricing guide, then you can sign up for the newsletter, and then you can send me all your dog photos. All right. So let's talk about startups. So startups, we need to make sure that those startups are growing, that they're moving in the right direction, they are creating content, or they're doing something. They're growth minded. So when we're kind of looking at our startups, they need to have like I said, like 10 to 25 employees, and they need to have at least 3 million in funding. So I have a friend who I know, who works with seed rounds. She works a lot of time with seed rounds and Series A, I think. And she does a different type of work. So when she does messaging and positioning projects. So if you haven't read April Dunford's book, April like the month, and then Dunford, Dunford, it's called Obviously Awesome. That will tell you about messaging and positioning for products. So that's more high paid work, like big time projects where you're helping people map out the messaging and positioning of their product. She works in a very specific niche. So she ends up working with seed companies. So her revenue range is different. But most of the time when you're working with startups, they need at least 3 million. That's what I figured out. They need 3 million because that's when they at least maybe are at Series B or they're at Series A and they're considering adding more marketing stuff or considering adding more content stuff. And for me, I used to think it was 1 million. I was like, okay, cool. But 1 million only sounds like a lot of money when you don't make $1 million. So a company operating on 1 million is like nothing. A company operating on 3 million, you might get some money in there to expand marketing. So that's the minimum. I think 3 million is the minimum for startups. I like 5 to 10 personally. So like if a startup has at least 5 to 10 million, that's a better minimum for me. But if they have more, like they're in Series B and they just bagged a huge pile of money, that helps a lot because Series B, I already know that they're moving on to more marketing activities. I already know they're moving on to more content. They're getting the word out. And if anything, content has become huge while everybody's still, we're still kind of swirling around in the pandemic stuff, or in all the stuff that's going on. I know, I hear you. I hear you being grumpy. I hear you over there being a sassy grump. Maybe we can fix this so you don't look so shadowy and creepy. I think that actually made it worse. Hold on. I know. You look like a bat. That's our bat signal. You can see her shadow on the wall. That's the bat signal so that we know she can save us from any type of terrors. Ready, buddy? Oh, sorry, buddy. 1, 2, 3, dog. Good job. All right, Charlotte, ready? Charlotte can catch anything. She's like the MJ of our house. All right. Well, the MJ basketball, not MJ baseball. We all know MJ baseball was not great. Okay, cool. So let's talk about anything else that I want to talk about. Okay, let's talk about this last thing. So just as a recap, regular businesses need 5 to 50 million, and they need probably like 50 to 100 employees-ish. If they have less than that, but they have the right revenue, try it out. You just never know. The other thing is startups need at least 3 million. You're probably in the Series A, Series B category. Sometimes if you do these messaging and positioning projects, you might end up doing seed rounds. But it really depends on the niche. So honestly, I think it's better to stick with 3 million. You can check it on Crunchbase. You can check it on Owler. You can just Google their revenue. You can look for press releases. You can check TechCrunch. I like the Crunchbase daily newsletter that tells me about companies and trends all the time. That's my favorite. You can also check the LinkedIn for their revenue and their company growth. All right, so let's talk about the third thing. Then we're gonna get to Hal's question. All right, so the last thing is when we get a big fish with ginormous revenue. So number one, I already talked about my story. So, if you found this helpful, give it a thumbs up. If you feel like you want to learn more about building a high-earning freelance writing business, subscribe. So the deal is that when you get a big fish with big revenue, that doesn't necessarily mean that revenue is going to you. So I've told the story, right? I had $1 billion company. I think they made 1.6 billion in revenue, and they asked me to work for free. I will never forget that story because it was insane. Like, why? They asked me to work for exposure. Like, no. So just because they have money and just because they're a big fish doesn't mean that their profit is enough to pay you well, right? So that goes back to our original. Can you stop bothering her? That goes back to our original thing where they have revenue of 100 million, but they only have 10 million in profit, and that profit gets sprinkled around in different budgets. So the deal is that when we get that big fish, we can be really excited, but we don't work for free and don't work for less than what you think that work is worth. Like, always charge your value, right? Always charge value. And always charge the value of that content to them. I think that that's something we miss a lot as writers is like, we're like, oh, it's only a this, but that thing lives for years. And I tell people this all the time. Like, when you write a case study, people use that for years. People use that case study to get more sales for years. They might have paid you $5,000 for it or $3,000 for it or $1,000 for it, but it brings them millions of dollars in money or hundreds of thousands of dollars of money or thousands of dollars more than they paid you in sales and customers. So the deal is that you always need to make sure that that's your priority. It doesn't really matter that the company's like a big fish, and it doesn't really matter that, yes, they might have a ton of revenue. The deal is that you need to charge proper rates. So you need to charge your value rates, the value of the project, And then you need to have a discussion with them about that, right? So even if they come to you and you're like, sweet, big fish, they must have a lot of money. There's a lot of times where big companies come to you and they have no money. And they're like, yeah, we're on a shoestring marketing budget because our money is all going to this other thing. So sometimes when you get a big fish, the slice of the pie is very different, right? Depending on the company. So a big fish might give marketing a very slim budget and just be like, work with it, deal with it. So the breaking point here is that even if they have a slim marketing budget, you still need to charge what your work is worth. You still need to charge good value rates for your work. It doesn't mean that you're like, oh, it's a big company, I'm going to shrink my rates to nothing. Now, caveat here, there are times where you may take less for your work because you want to work with a big client because other people in your niche see that client as like a big deal. So sometimes what ends up happening is that you end up cutting your rates slightly because you're like, okay, well, their budget is this and that's close enough to my rates that I feel comfortable and I really want this client. Sometimes that will happen. And these are the kind of one-off decisions you have to make. This shouldn't apply across the board, okay? It should not apply across the board that you just cut your rates for every client that you get. There are very specific instances where you're like, oh man, I really want to work with blah, blah, like this giant company in my niche, right? It's okay to accept less because I really want to work with this client. And it doesn't mean you work with that client forever at that rate. That means that you work with that client, get some clips, and then you decide whether or not you want to keep working at that rate with that client, or if you want to go off and find, I have everybody licking my hands on either side. If you want to go off and find other clients and say, yes, I've worked for this giant company in your niche. Like, do you want to work with me? So don't forget that. Don't forget that just because it's a big fish, that they may not have the marketing budget, you need to charge value rates. The other thing is that every once in a while when you get a big fish, sometimes you take the big fish client and yes, their budget is a little bit smaller than you'd hope for, but that's going to be a client that you really want to work for. You really like their company. You really like that they're a big fish in your niche, and you're willing to take a slight kind of pay cut to start working with them and to, you know, hopefully maybe their budget will get bigger, or maybe what'll happen is you then can say that you've worked with this big client and that helps you get more clients and helps you grow your business. All right. So we're going to get to Hal's question now, and we're going to do a pup date. So go back to your little hobbit hole. Go back over there. Charlotte, go to your hobbit hole. Charlotte, high five. Good job. Other one. Good job. All right. Ready? Gosh, you're such a beast. I can't believe it. Bo has always struggled so much to get those Tritos, and you just no big deal for you. All right, so let's do Hal's question. All right. Oh, and reminder, you can be just like Hal. You can send a question in. So if you go to mandyellis.com/question, you can put a question in there, or you can put a topic in there. If you don't have a question, you're like, can you talk more about this? I sure can. Pop it in here. So if you can't make it to the live stream and ask questions, I know we had questions from Vicky and Shara this time. So if you can't make it to the live stream or you're watching this as a replay, you can always go to mandyellis.com/question, put in a question or topic. So Hal says, hi, Mandy. Very insightful article this week and helpful perspective on how we should be thinking about the value we bring to clients in terms of the way we price our work. So he's talking about my weekly newsletter. So my weekly newsletter, I know this is very large right now. So my weekly newsletter was talking about the difference between like clients who pay value rates and you charging value rates. This is something that I think is a big confusion point that I talk to about writers. So like, well, how do you find out if someone pays your rates? Well, there's a difference between clients with like a really good budget for content and the times when you say like, these are my rates, does that work for you? So that's what I was talking about in the newsletter. And this is kind of like what's nice about the newsletter is they're like quick hits that you can read through. So it says, how would you respond to a prospect who clearly sees your value but is hesitant because of the rate and asks something to the effect of, how do you justify your pricing? Would discussion of their ROI be the primary response? Niche expertise, going rates? I'm thinking if they're asking this question, they're probably not your client. Thank you. So let me edit this real quick. All right. Now it should be smaller. Cool. So here's the deal. They don't see your value if they're hesitant about price. That's the number one. Anybody who sees value is like, I want to work with you. That's the deal. I want to work with you. Whatever that costs, I want to work with you. That's the big difference between when people see an article or a case study or a piece of content in your portfolio and they're like, I want that. And you're like, that's awesome. I'm so glad you love that sample. That sample cost this much money for me to create for you, right? That's the difference. They don't see value if they're hesitant to pay the rate. This is what I found over many, many years. The idea is that they say, I want this. They pick out stuff from your portfolio or they pick out something and they say, I want this. And you're like, that's great. It costs this. They're like, great. In order to get this thing, now it costs this. I will pay that because I want this result. The deal is that if they're coming in and asking you to justify your pricing, they don't see value. They don't. Like, the value is obvious. It's, oh my gosh, you're so sassy. I'm going to pick you up. Come here. I'm going to pick you up. If you're going to be sassy, I'm going to pick you up. Come here. All right. So think of it sort of like art, right? The value is set, right? And you want that thing. You go in there and you're like, I want that painting. And you're like, that's great. That painting costs this much money. And if that thing is valuable to them, they will pay that much money because they like that thing. They want that result. They want that painting to hang in their house. So anytime someone's asking you to justify your pricing, they don't see the value. They've missed the value on the content, and my guess is they probably don't have like a lot of long-term goals for their content. They don't see the runway. Like, they don't see the whole flight plan. They're just like floofing around. So I would not even bother discussing ROI, because the minute you start getting in a conversation with someone who's like, well, justify this and justify that and tell me about this and what is your, like, you're getting too far in the hole. There's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, like, I totally get it. Here's some stats from HubSpot, or here's some stats from my other projects that may be helpful in understanding how this content can help your business. But I found that when you start getting in this long discussion, that's a way different discussion than someone saying like, hey, can you help me understand, like, what kind of stuff I can expect? Like, is there something I should know? Or like, these are our goals. Does that seem reasonable? Is there anything that like kind of helps me understand like timeline? That discussion and getting your perspective is way different than someone coming to you basically and saying, justify why I should hire you, or justify why you should get this ROI. Like, that's, for me, most of the time has been a losing discussion. That their perspective is off. They're not coming to you discussing the content and coming from a position of like, I know the content is valuable because of XYZ. Can you help me get a deeper understanding? They're just like, I don't want to spend this money because it sounds like a lot. Like, now you need to prove to me that it's worth it. Like, that's no. The other thing here is that I guess if you really want to like get into niche expertise and going rates, like, I don't feel like you should be on a call with someone like that. I think the deal is that when you talk to someone, there should be a mutual thing. You looked through their website, you looked through their content, you looked at that person's LinkedIn, you looked at all these things. So you're coming to a meeting with an understanding of what's going on at their company and who's running things, how they've been doing content. They should be doing the same. They should be going to your website. They should be seeing your clips. They should be seeing what's going on. They shouldn't come on a call and be like, oh, this is this random writer. Tell me who you are. What the fuck? Like, that kind of stuff. That's not where we should be. Sometimes that happens because you get passed along. So like, the person who you originally talked to says like, hey, I need you to talk to our CEO. And the CEO doesn't know as much as the person who found you and looked at all your stuff. Different story. But the deal is that when you start going into all of these nitty gritty things, like, that conversation is starting from the wrong premise. It's not that we don't need to have a conversation about ROI or the value of content or whatever. It's that we are aligning with people who already see the value in that thing, right? Like, we're already, I'm going to squeeze you. Come here. You got to stop making a noise. I'm going to squeeze you. I'm going to squeeze those cheeks. Okay. So the deal is that there's nothing wrong with giving stats. There's nothing wrong with explaining things to get a deeper understanding of content strategy, why the content is being created, all that stuff. You don't want to get into a nickel and diming conversation, which is what this is. Hey, how, like, once you give someone a price, and you talk about a project and they come back with, well, why does it cost so much? Or can you justify, I have a little hiccups. Can you justify this to me? Tell me what your ROI is, Like, That's the wrong premise. We all know that content marketing takes a long time to work out. We all know that. Like, that's content marketing is a long-term effort, sustained over a long period of time, right? So if you go in there and someone's starting with the premise, not of like this long-term goal or why they're creating the content or how it's bringing value to their audience, or how it's making a difference to them in their business, or how it's helping get brand awareness or new sales and leads or new subscribers, they're coming with like a one-on-one discussion of like, you need to justify like why this costs so much. Like, nope, we're at the wrong premise. The premise is like, if you're giving ROI information and stats and whatever, and you're giving a bunch of information based on giving them a deeper understanding of like what I said before, right? Like, okay, here's our long-term plan. We're thinking about doing these things. Do you feel like that? Like, they're asking for your perspective. They're asking for your opinion. And they're saying like, is there anything that you can help us get a deeper understanding? And then you have a discussion with them. This is not a discussion. This is like an aggressive, like, you need to tell me why this costs so much. And like, you need to tell me, like, they don't see value. Value is something that makes the price obvious. Value is something where you're like, of course it costs that much, or of course that makes sense, or wow, I thought you'd actually charge more for your work based on your samples. I thought you'd charge more, right? There's been times where I have gone to clients and say, yeah, I typically charge this. And they're like, oh, we pay a lot more than that. And I'm like, sounds great, right? That's something where they see the value in that content to pay really well for it. That's the point. You don't want to be going to clients where they're like trying to like, wear you down on price, or where they are trying to get you to like lower things, or where they're trying to get you personally to like defend your value and all this stuff. Like, I'm sure you can do that, but they're in the wrong mindset. The deal is that any of us freelance writers can, of course, find stats, justify our pricing. We can tell everybody, like, this is my niche expertise. This is how many years of experience I have. This is the going rate. This is the ROI. We can say all that stuff. But those facts and logic does not change the emotional impact of the value part, right? People are paying. Value is a mix of logic and emotion, okay? This is what I've figured out. Value is dependent on how they see it, right? How that person sees that thing long term. That's an emotional, like, I know this is going to come back. I feel that this is important. I feel that this will help our audience. And then they back it up with stats like, I know content marketing gets this much ROI, blah, blah, blah. This is the problem. You can't change someone's emotional outlook on the content, on the value of that thing. You can give them facts and logic and whatever, but that doesn't change their feeling of whether or not creating this content is valuable. That's the issue. So when you're looking at these things, someone who sees your value would be like, of course, that totally makes sense. Like, I've had many conversations with people where I say like, oh yeah, the ballpark range is this. And they're like, oh, of course that makes sense. Or I've had conversations where people are like, oh, we usually pay a lot more, like normally our rate is $1.25 a word. And I'm like, oh, well, that sounds great. Let's do that. Here you go, buddy. Oh, you're so close. But the deal is that you should know, if they start trying to make you prove all of these little things, they already are on the wrong page. They don't see the value. They're missing the boat. They're on the wrong bus. I talked about this, and I've talked about this with someone where it's the difference between you getting on a bus and saying, why are you you have a bus. Okay, let's start with this. You have a bus. That bus has drinks and snacks and party lights and friends, and it's so fun. And your client gets on a different bus that has broken seats, springs sticking out of everywhere, and it smells like old bananas or something. And you're like, why are you on that bus? This bus has drinks and snacks and friends and party lights. It's so fun. And they get on the other bus. Like, you can't convince them that the drinks and the snacks and the party bus and the lights and all that stuff is fun. Like, they're just getting on the other bus. when they don't see the value in the party lights or the drinks and the snacks, and they're like, actually, I like this bus because it's more cost effective, or like, we've always used this bus, then you're not you're not on the same playing field. You can't convince someone, like, here's another good example. So like when I went apartment shopping with my dad in Phoenix, my the real estate agent that helped us was really great. She was really helpful, but the things that mattered to her clients typically, right? She's not normally doing apartments. She did it as a favor. But she normally does houses, right? So she's pointing out things that people normally care about in houses. And my dad is very like, does not care about that. So like when she's like, oh, there's crown molding, and oh, there's this other thing, and oh, well, everything is stainless steel. My dad's like, I don't care about that. Does this thing function? That's the same thing. You're not in the same playing field. She's talking about granite countertops, or she's talking about crown molding, or she's talking about, the view, or she's talking about all of these things that her clients typically care about. And my dad just does not care about those things. He does not see value in those things. He sees value in like, yeah, but like, is this safe? And is this other thing? Like, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the people that understand why the drinks and the snacks and the party lights are really important. Not that they're just there for like, fun and flair. They're there because they need to be there, and because they're providing a lot of things that the content needs. I hope this is making sense. So like, it doesn't matter how much you tell people that crown molding helps the value of a house or makes it beautiful or whatever. If they don't see the value in it, they don't care. Or if they say, like you go to a house, right? It's the difference between like looking at a house that's like super gaudy and that's not your thing, and looking at a minimalist house and being like, yes, they cost the same amount of money. Let's say they're both luxury homes. They cost the same amount of money, and you just don't care about gold-plated toilets and gold-plated sinks and like gold handles. Like you want something minimalist that looks like, it's designed by those people in Sweden. I forget their names, but who make those really beautiful minimalist homes, right? You don't care about those things. You're just on the wrong bus. I could tell you how this gold came from like this place, and like, oh, this was inspired by their trip to the Maldives. And I could tell you all these things, but it doesn't matter to you. You like the minimalism. You like this other thing. They can be the same price, but the preference is different. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I know it was a long-winded response, but they don't see value in it. Like they're on the wrong bus. You're telling them about drinks and snacks and party lights, and they don't care. They're getting on the banana smelly bus. They're off the boat. Okay. Hope that was helpful. All right, let's do one more pup date since we're all here. If you feel like this has been helpful, give it a thumbs up. I am always interested to hear this. So if you have different revenue ranges, or you found out different types of things in your niche that work, make sure to drop it in the comments below. Or if you have anything that you feel like could use a better explanation, drop it in the comments below. Let's do a pup date. All right, Charlotte, you have to go back to your hobbit hole, or I'm going to pick you up. Go back to your hobbit hole. All right, ready? High five. Other one. Other one. Nope. Other one. High five. Other one. No, you gotta do the other one. Come on. You gotta do the other one. You gotta do this one. There we go. Good job. All right, Barry, ready? 1, 2, 3, bear. Good job, buddy. You did great. You're an all-star. Every time I adjust the camera, I feel like you guys just like sit in different areas. Marie says, recently a potential client contacted me and wanted a discount when I gave him the, oh, this is actually a good thing. I remember this. We talked about this. So recently a potential client contacted me and wanted a discount. When I gave him the proposal and invoice, he came back and wanted more and a bigger discount. Unless I did it free, he was not happy. Go back to your hobbit hole. Yeah, this is the problem, right? Like, it's not about, no, you have to go all the way back to your hobbit hole. Ready, buddy? Good job. Back up. Back up. Back it up. Back it up. Back it up. All right. So here's the deal, is it's not about the discount. It's not about giving them money off. It's not about proving all these things. You're operating from the wrong premise, right? So even if you give someone a discount, even if you give them stats and facts, they're operating from the fact that they don't want to do this in the first place. That someone convinced them that content was important, or someone tried to convince them that they should do content, but they don't want to, or they don't see that it's important. So then it doesn't matter how much discount you give them, or it doesn't matter how much stuff you do or what you say, What ends up happening is you just end up getting unhappy clients because they don't want to do it in the first place. Yeah, good job, buddy. Back up. Back up, you sausage. Back up, sausage. Back up. Back up. Good job. All right, high five. Good job. Other one. Other one. No, you gotta meet my hand. Oh, come on. Good job. All right. So that's the whole, hold on one second. There we go. Okay. So where did it go? Anyways, let's pop this up. So that's the deal, right? The deal is that when someone, right, contacts you and you're trying to, the more you try to meet someone where they're at when they're on the wrong bus, you then get on that bus and then you're just like, ugh, like what's happening? Like you align with people who are not on the same playing field. Like they're not even remotely understanding why they're doing the content in the first place, or how it's going to impact their audience, or how it's going to impact their bottom line. They aren't convinced on the actual premise of content. It's not you, it's like the premise of content, and then now you are caught in the crossfire of like, why does it cost so much, right? Yeah, don't give discounts. I don't know if I've ever given a discount. I think I might have once on a clump of work where I was like, I would give them a discount if they signed up for more stuff, but that was like years ago. And I just don't think that sets the right tone. Like there's sometimes where you negotiate on a budget where someone's like, oh man, we really want to work with you. You know, we only have X amount of dollars, you know, and otherwise like, you know, we'll have to refer someone else, but we really want to work with you. Sometimes you'll negotiate down, but it'll be a small chunk of money. It won't be a huge pile of money. But the discount thing is just like way that they're asking, like they want, right? They want the champagne content on the beer budget. And that just, they have a mismatch. Like if you want that thing that you saw in my portfolio, it costs this amount of money. That's it. Yeah, I don't think discounts are a good idea. All right, buddy, ready? All right, we're going to hop off in just a second after we do this. Good job, bud. All right, ready? Oh, man, you're on fire. All right, Charlie, ready? High five. Other one. Other one. Other one. Good job. All right, Charlie, you're going to catch this. Ready? Back up. Back up. You got to back up or else I can't throw it to you. Back up. Over here. Okay. Well, close enough. Ready? Good job. All right. We're going to hop off. I hope that this was helpful. I feel like this is sometimes a complicated thing to understand in terms of like revenue that companies need to have and why they need to have the certain amount of money and how that impacts your goals for your business and how that impacts who you work with and if it's a good client or not. These are really important things to know, especially revenue, profit, and how startups work, you know, seed money through series, whatever they're in. So I hope that was helpful. If you feel like it was helpful, give it a thumbs up. If you want to learn more about building a high earning freelance writing business, subscribe. We always have pup dates and Wild Beans. Come here, Wild Bean. She just like, I always know if she's, you know, bothering me by making noises because she knows she's not supposed to do that. If I tell her I'm going to pick her up, she's like, okay, stop. All right. So I hope everybody has a good Friday, and I will see you next Friday with the live stream. And happy writing. Hope everything goes well. And puppers say hello.